Hello, everyone. Good evening and very welcome to this additional expert webinar. And I'm very pleased to introduce two great speakers and experts in inclusion and safeguarding. As Ollie stated earlier, we will be having two speakers today. One is Miss Peninnah Vulimu and the other one, Miss Eunice Muturi. Peninnah will start the session, and she's the Skills for Prosperity Kenya technical lead. Peninnah is a community development professional with more than 15 years of experience in inclusive education, disability and development, and gender transformative programs with organizations such as Africa Network for the Prevention and Production Against Child Abuse and Neglect, Plan International, World Vision, and currently for Skills for Prosperity, she's working with Leonard, Cheshire. Peninnah has significant experience in technical advisory skills in education, disability, and youth programs, and have worked with so many different state and non-state stakeholders. Here, I'll also introduce Ms. Eunice Muturi, who is the Regional Safeguarding Manager for Africa. Eunice is a humanitarian professional with, again, more than 15 years of experience in managing, implementing, and providing safeguarding and governance risk for funded projects and programs in stable, fragile, and urban contexts with World Vision, goal-oriented global task forces, and again, currently with Leonard, Cheshire. As an advocate for protection and promoting the realization of human rights for all, especially the vulnerable in our society, she works collaboratively with local partner institutions, duty bearers, and other like-minded agencies to identify creative and agile approaches to sustainability, build an ethical and safeguarding and risk intelligent culture in a rapidly evolving context. So I'm so excited to listen to these two great speakers with a quite different angle and perspective or view on inclusion, disability, and accessibility of education in a digital education context. Without any further ado, I hand over to Peninnah to begin the talk. Thank you very much, Peninnah.
Thank you very much, Freshte, for the very wonderful start off of the meeting. My name is Peninnah, and I will be talking to you about digital education, but now looking at issues of gender inclusion. And to that effect, I will be making my presentation, which I'll be sharing with you. And through it, we will be able to have the discussion. And from there, if there are any questions that are emerging, I would be very much happy to respond to them. Thank you so much. So thank you very much. I'm going to take you through gender and inclusion in digital education provision. And I am aware that we are practicing in various contexts, especially in the higher education institutions. So how I've been able to structure the presentation is as follows. We will be able to look at two objectives, and then we will be able to look at understanding gender, inclusion, and disability. And also during this session, we are going to look at the key terms in gender and inclusion as you interact with digital learning or even any other learning material that you'd want to increase your knowledge on, some of the key terminologies that you'll find from time to time. Then we are also going to have some interaction on disability and gender. What is out there as Skills for Prosperity Kenya? Why disability and gender, and why do we feel that disability and gender are actually entangled and we can't address one without looking at the other? And then also as practitioners in the higher education institutions, we are going to look at what are the barriers to three key areas in online learning or digital education. One, the barriers to access, the barriers when it comes to participation, and also the barriers in learning. So access, participation, and learning are very key aspects when it comes to inclusive digital learning or even digital education. And then how can we be able to address the gender and inclusion related barriers, and then the role of higher education institutions in enhancing inclusive digital learning. Next slide, please. So our first objective will be to increase our understanding on gender and inclusion in the education systems. And then this one will particularly, remember the education system is very wide, but we are going to focus on digital education provision in the context of what we are doing in this program and Skills for Prosperity. And then we will also be able to examine the nature of gender and disability related barriers and their structural formation and how do they impact on our digital education. For example, the ways in which exclusion is reinforced within either the institutions of higher learning or even the technical vocational education and training. And then we will be able to explore our role as higher education institutions in addressing the barriers. Next slide, please, Oli. So when we talk about gender, what is gender? From from a development perspective, gender is simply a social construct, or it's really constructed in the social world where we live, and it's constructed by just a set of attributes. It refers to a set of attributes, relationships, roles, and opportunities that are associated by either one being male or a female. And by virtue of it being a system of socially constructed attributes, socially constructed relationships, or socially constructed roles and opportunities, it really then later on leads to power imbalances between men and women. Why do we say so? Again, gender equality. When we think about gender equality, and especially in the education context, uh, this refers to a condition where there is the absence of any discrimination on the basis of either you being male or female, by virtue of your social system giving you particular attributes that either describe how you should behave as a woman, or how you should behave as a girl, or how you should behave as a man, or how you should behave as a boy. Then now, so gender equality is just making sure that you are not facing any discrimination on the basis of how now the various attributes your society has given to you, either as a man or a woman. And also, gender equality further just ensures that there is full and equal exercise of rights by both women and men. And now, in our education context, when we talk about gender equality, especially in the online and digital learning, is just that state of making sure that there is no discrimination by basis of either you being male or female. If it's a product, you're able to access it. If it is either a process, you're able to access it. And then gender norms. As we address matters to do with how society describes how men and women should be, the roles we are given, again, we need to understand the term gender norms. And gender norms are simply informal, just informal but very deeply entrenched and widely held expectations. This is how your society or the community that you are based in, the society or the environment that this learner is based in, or the rules that have been put there on how they expect male or female to behave, boys or girls to behave. And every society tends to have very distinct gender norms because gender in itself is not fixed. So in the rural, there is what is expected of who is a male or a female. In the urban, again, so really these are really the gender norms that surround even our learning institutions. And even the learners that we have tend to be coming from such backgrounds of being either accustomed to these gender norms. Then gender responsive education. In Skills for Prosperity program, as we move on to either develop our projects, as we move on to either come up with our context, again, we will be asking ourselves, what is gender responsive education? And gender responsive education simply refers to this education that is able to identify and address the different needs of girls and boys, women and men, to promote equal outcomes. In whatever programs that we are doing, or in whatever projects that we are doing, we can only say that we are gender responsive if then the products that we are making, the innovations that we are making, the content that we are delivering as a university, if it's able to, one, identify and address the different needs of male and female learners, and then it's able to again promote equal outcomes on an equal basis. However, when we talk about gender responsive education, just good for us to note that it does not now seek to redress the gender inequalities, no, but it only seeks to give or promote the equal outcomes, looking at the various needs of girls and boys, or women and men in the education system, and making sure that we are promoting equal outcomes of learning. Next slide, please. Mhm. Having said that about gender, you do realize that our session today, we want to explore both gender and inclusion. And inclusion in the context of Skills of Prosperity program, where we are programming with you as higher education institutions. We are looking at women, persons with disabilities, and also young people from the low income. So what is disability? Disability simply refers to people who have long-term, and mark it long-term. It has to be long-term physical, mental, intellectual, or sensory impairments, which in interaction with the various barriers, maybe in your learning institution, maybe in the community where they live, may hinder their full and effective participation in society on an equal basis. That is the definition of disability. So from time to time in this presentation, you're going to see the term gender, you're going to see the term disability. And then now when we talk about now inclusion, because our session is capturing gender and inclusion in the online digital learning. Inclusion is just the process of ensuring that all learners in our institutions, regardless of ability or disability, gender, age, your income level, your class or race or ethnicity or language, migration or displacement status, HIV status, that they have the right to fully access, participate, and learn while developing their various talents, skills, and potential. Next slide. So again, when it comes to learning in the higher education institutions, we are not able to talk about gender in isolation. When you look at Skills for Prosperity, our target populations, we are cognizant of the fact that when we do programs that target women, persons with disabilities, and also low-income youth, there is a way how the exclusion they are facing, or if inclusion has to happen, we have to look at the other vulnerabilities that this particular one individual, for example, a woman or a person with a disability or a low-income youth, is also faced with, or is faced with from a day to day in the system. So the term intersectionality refers to understanding that a person's identity is made up of multiple intersecting factors. For this learner that you are meeting, maybe you are developing a product for on online learning, the age, there's issues of age that come into play as you purpose to provide this education, issues of income level, issues of race, issues of ethnicity, and all these issues. In a way, there is how they interact and affect or impact on the ability of this learner to be able to access whatever products as S4P we've been able to develop, or their ability to participate effectively in the learning that you are providing online, or also it also affects their ability as a learner to be able to either again express the skills that have been acquired or be able to utilize the skills acquired. So in general, intersectionality simply reminds us that the exclusion and discrimination from the education system, be it face-to-face learning or be it online learning, will rarely be as a result of only maybe I being a woman. No. Exclusion or inclusion comes into play, or I'll feel excluded by virtue of either one or two characteristics that I possess. Either I'm a woman, then I have a disability. Either I'm a woman, then I come from a low income level family. And so all those factors come into play, and that is what we mean by intersectionality and the need for us to be cognizant about it. So, as a program in Skills for Prosperity Kenya, as we program and even as we work in higher education institutions, there is need for us to understand why gender and why disability. As we had said, really, as women, you're given various roles, there are various expectations. But then again, as a person with a disability, you have an impairment that interacts with the environment you are learning with. So disability and gender are very critical to us. Why? When we look at the data that is outside there, as a program, we believe in evidence-based programming. So in our program, 19.2% of our women globally, actually, according to WHO, have a disability as compared to 12% of the total population. What does that mean? This is a population that can't be ignored. This is a population that is out there largely due to either systematic exclusions that have happened. Either you are with a disability simply because you didn't get education, and as a result, maybe you got into a violent relationship, you were violated, you lost either a part of your functional body part, and as a result, you found yourself now having a disability. Or either as a woman or as a boy, you have a disability simply because you grew up in a low income household, and then because of low health outcomes, you are not able maybe to be either even cured of simple diseases such as malaria, leading to loss of hearing loss, issues to do with either mumps that has even resulted in some children even being able to lose their hearing ability, or even other diseases such as rubella, and you're able to lose even maybe your sight. Another thing why disability and gender matters very much to us as education practitioners is women rights movements for a long time have not been able to include women in their fight towards rights. And if they have been included, not really have they been consulted for either various reasons that we are going to explore. And so we end up having disability and gender as two key issues that we really, even in the education system, we must know that women and also persons with disabilities, as they interact with our learning processes, our learning products, they are affected in one way or another, hence leaving them facing significant barriers. And then again, when we talk about disability and gender, women and girls with disabilities tend to be discriminated against differently in different contexts. And the discrimination they encounter, for example, in the rural, for example, in the urban, is varied. And so the same way as we develop online digital learning, we need to be cognizant of the products that we are making, the innovations that we are making around. How do the impairments that the women that we are working with, or the male learners that we are working with, how do their impairments interact with our product? And as they are interacting with our products, does it increase again the discrimination they've already faced while out of the education context, for instance, in their cultural context, or it is reducing? Next slide, please. So as we talk about digital and online learning, or open and digital learning, how various universities would be able to term it, what are some of the barriers to access that we are facing out there? And maybe to just start us off is, we may be asking ourselves, when we talk about barriers, what are barriers? A barrier is simply an obstacle that prevents a person, and in this case, a learner that you are targeting in within this program, from accessing either the learning environment or the learning products on an equal basis with the counterparts. And so you may get women, you may get young people, you may get persons with disabilities who are faced by various barriers, which when they interact with in our systems, then it prevents them from accessing the learning environment or even the learning products that we have developed as a program. And for us to be able to address the barriers as higher education institutions practitioners, um, barriers can be best analyzed and understood only when we are able to think through these four key questions. These four key questions are questions which I would encourage us as we go out to really focus on. Because one, are we able to ask ourselves, what are the barriers to access of the product or the process that I'm making? What are the barriers to participation? What is barring women, what is barring persons with disabilities or even youth to participate? And even what is barring learning with the product that I'm making, with the process that I'm making, with the instructors that I'm having in my institution? And then who is perpetuating the barriers and why? Are the barriers perpetuated by us as the instructors? These are questions which, if we are able to respond to as practitioners, it answers the question of then now, how do we address learning in a digital education provision? And then again, every now and then when we are designing our programs, when we are delivering that module in the classroom, who is experiencing these barriers? Who, when he or she is coming to listen to my class presentation, is facing an obstacle that is preventing him or her from either accessing, from either participating, and from either being able to acquire much skills that I expect? And then how can they be minimized? So these are 4 key questions that in the long run you'll realize will become take-home questions for us as we work on our programs, as we interact in the classroom with our learners to look at this. Next slide, please. So, in our analysis as Skills for Prosperity program, we have various barriers that we have recognized continue to affect access, participation, and learning in digital education. And there are 3 categories. And the first category is the systematic barriers. And if we ask ourselves the other questions, how do these systematic barriers present? For example, access is never guaranteed for learners who have different social characteristics. For example, as a learner with a disability, if I'm to access the course that you are developing today or the content that you are developing today, is my participation guaranteed? If I'm a woman, maybe I've just given birth and left the institution and I'm based in the rural, and maybe I'm in a low income household, I'm not able to access possibly data. In the coinage of the system, is it in a way that I can learn offline? Or does it require I must have data access? And maybe is it time for me to take care of my baby and I'm not able to again access? So there's the issues around no guarantee of learners with different social characteristics comes in. And then again, even lack of information on training options. Maybe as you're developing that course, are there various training options that you can learn offline, you have to be online? Such kind of a thing is actually a systematic barrier. Then again, learners, e.g. persons with disabilities or women and youth, not being able to meet entry requirement. This is a systematic barrier because we have cutoff points. But in those cutoff points, have we been able to consider really what it takes for a learner with a disability to qualify for the particular course that you've been able to set its standards on? Or even the particular course content that we are developing, have we looked at if this is going to be a barrier? Again, attendance and enrollment in our universities sometimes may be a barrier by virtue of not efficiently tracking who is excluded, how, and why. Are we having a way we are able to interrogate our data as universities that it's able to tell us if they didn't attend, if they did not enroll in this course, accessibility is an issue? That again is a barrier, a systemic barrier. And then again, learners who drop out and non-completion related cases due to either facing cultural and social and cultural discrimination, not being tracked. This again in itself is a barrier, which many universities may be facing this because we don't track our data. We are not able to do it. And then again, the teaching pedagogy. This is a systematic issue. We are a university. This is how we deliver our courses. This is how we deliver. Maybe we deliver through notes. Have we thought about users of sign language? Have we talked about when we are using image, for example, online? There's an image that you've given online in that context. Have you put there alternative text so that if it's a blind person, the reader is able to explain to him or her that there is a lady in this color of a t-shirt, so that is really able to learn simultaneously alongside others. Second slide, please. The second type of barrier that again you'll find in digital education provision are the environmental barriers. Environmental barriers simply looks at really in within our learning environment as universities. For example, having an accessible learning environment. How is it inaccessible? It is one thing to have maybe a digital center, a digital laboratory, a digital library where all learners can access the courses. But has it considered the accessibility needs of learners with disabilities? Has it considered the accessibility needs of instructors with disabilities or lecturers with disabilities, for example? And when we talk about disability, not only when I go to institutions, I'm told we have ramps and that's okay. A ramp may not be beneficial to an instructor or a learner who is maybe visually impaired. It may not really meet the needs that he or she would want to see in any accessible learning environment. The second environmental barrier that we face, especially in online content, is around the educational online content that we are having, both for the teachers or the instructors, and even now for the learners. Being inaccessible, that in itself is an environmental barrier because there is lack of adaptation and even inclusive design methods, or even just looking at the instructional and learning activities that we are using. As we are in the classroom, being cognizant of our instructional and learning activities. Are we asking every learner that look at me, for example, look at what I'm doing and emulate it? What if there's a visually impaired learner in that classroom? Is he or she able to look at you as a learner, as an instructor, and repeat or mimic what you've been able to say? If he's a learner who is deaf, is he or she able to take the instruction that look at me and say what I say, for example, such simple things. So again, I've included in these, if we want to really look at how we can make our online content very important, there's some very good material from on EduLinks, and CBM has just been able to simplify for us who are developing online material. How can you have a digital accessibility toolkit with you to help you as you work on addressing environmental barriers? You are compliant. Next slide, which is our last lot of barriers in digital learning. Now, again, another type of barriers. Remember, we've been able to look at systematic barriers. We've looked at the environmental barriers, and then the last group of barriers is the attitudinal or either social, cultural, and economic barriers. This one plays the greatest role, especially as we go out to design our programs or deliver our learning online. How does this manifest? You find this lack of information about the socioeconomic living conditions of our learners in the institutions. As a university, have we collected the information about the socioeconomic living conditions to ensure that then we are designing a program that is inclusive of learners who are either coming from low income environments and we are responsive to their needs. If they are from low income, how well are we responding to that? Again, some families tend to face economic barriers to school enrollment and even attendance, especially families that have learners with disabilities or families that have girl child and maybe they are faced with the issues we say, the intersectionality. Culture doesn't support enrollment of learners with disabilities even in the universities. Culture doesn't support even the enrollment of learners with disability in universities. So again, these economic barriers that the families are facing, they are able to choose between, do I enroll a learner without a disability or do I enroll the one with a disability? Again, the stereotypes that are based on either the religion, ethnicity, stereotypes that are towards those that have faced sexual gender-based violence, and even the social identity. We are continuously seeing learners who are either they have gender identities which maybe the community looks at them in a different way. The community is really encouraging maybe their discrimination. All these come to play in our digital education provision. And then finally, the discriminatory attitudes and norms on learners with disabilities, on male and female learners in relation to education. All these barriers are in within our digital learning spectrum. And when our learners interact with these barriers, they are either less likely to benefit from our programs or they are either likely to even not participate in our programs or they are also not able to effectively learn in within the system. So having looked at the barriers, how do we address them? We have 5 key things that we really front for as Skills for Prosperity program and even in the inclusive development world. One, there's need for us to really look at the evidence generation. Really, are we gathering enough data that is disaggregated by gender in our universities, data that is disaggregated by the low income or high income? Are we able to really disaggregate our data to the extent that it is able to inform this program that you are innovating on? It's able to inform this program that you are designing. It's able to inform the decision that you are making. And in a way, it is able to address the inequalities and reduce any harmful gender norm or practice in the university or even in the community. Again, secondly, and I know I'm speaking to teachers or instructors or trainers, transforming our pedagogy. Really, as trainers, there's need either in the universities to continuously invest in assessing the instructors or the lecturers' inclusive education knowledge and skills in the classroom and even online as they teach. You're able to assess it through either self-assessments, through either monitoring of the system to see how they are doing it, through either peer-to-peer engagements, and just ensuring that for us to have a transformed pedagogy, then we have the appropriate skills that are responsive to the varied needs. And then thirdly, again, for us to make sure that we are addressing these gender and inclusion related barriers, just making sure that we have accessible infrastructure that follows the universal design principles. As we are designing our programs, are we able to make sure that then our program is able to be accessed by either a woman, a man, a person with a disability, either it's visual impairment, either it's hearing impairment, either it's those really mix of really methods, use of text, use of sound, use of really inbuilt captions to make sure that anybody who interacts with our program has the standards of universal design and principles met. And then again, continuously, if we have to break the barriers as maybe university practitioners, again, involving the women, the low income youth and persons with disabilities to just understand maybe at the piloting, what are their experiences as they're interacting with your program? How is it impacting on them? How does it impact on the quality? Has your innovation or do your delivery methods or does your online learning platform either encourage quality? Is it relevant to their needs? Is it enhancing equity, or it continues to make them be excluded, to make them not earn the skills? And then ensure that the staff that are going to be working with these women and learners with disabilities and low income youth receive that professional training on inclusive principles, because inclusive principles not only target persons with disabilities, but inclusive principles that ensure even low income youth feel received, feel understood, and feel that the options in the universities are providing a way out for me. Next slide. And then our role as higher education institutions. One, as a program, we look at currently with the innovations that you are doing, with the kind of various programs that you are doing as your projects, there is a rich platform for evidence and research to be able to just inform what is working, what has worked well, and what doesn't work. And in return, that evidence is able to inform either your university policy on inclusion of women, persons with disabilities, and young people, or even it's able to just inform the design. And then again, there is really an opportunity and you have a role to just enhance peer-to-peer learning, especially amongst various lecturers or you as various practitioners in the universities. Because through your community of practice, you are able to learn what is it, for example, Kenyatta University or for example, Chuka University has done that has ensured that women enrolled onto that course, or that has ensured that even staffing within the institution were able to really adapt very quickly to providing inclusive education. And then with that community of practice, you're able to influence attitudes and policy again around gender and inclusion. And then influencing through transforming stakeholder engagements with the public and private sector. We do believe that post this program or even during this program, you have a role to use your good examples that you've been able to get on enhancing inclusive digital learning by just making sure that you are able to transform how other stakeholders, for example, women view fellow women, or even families view learners with disabilities, or even fellow lecturers and how they view the performance of women and persons with disabilities. And then finally, again, innovation and replication of the best practices beyond this program, because various institutions here are having various programs. And if we are able to ensure that inclusion happens, then we are able to enhance innovation and replication. Thank you very much. That brings me to the end of my presentation, but I would welcome any questions if they are at the end, maybe of after the other presenter. Thank you, and back to you, Oli and Freshte.
Thank you so much, Freshte. And I continue from where Peninnah has stopped, and building on the presentation where we've talked about gender and inclusion. The next leg, like the way you imagine the African stool with the 3 legs, is that you have to think about the safety aspects of it, which is safeguarding. Move to the next slide, please. So in terms of safeguarding in the digital learning agenda, we will just try to define what is safeguarding, and then see if we can see some of the aspects of harm that have been happening in our learning institutions. And probably we've not been taking them as an issue of concern, and see how we can address some of them and slowly begin to build a culture of safeguarding in our learning institutions. And we do so recognizing that safeguarding is a duty, and it's part of what makes us to be human beings. Next. Safeguarding, therefore, it's a duty. It's a duty of care, and every institution of learning has a duty of care to its people, to its staff, to its students, and to everybody who is working with that institution, including the service providers. And when you're thinking about safeguarding, then you look at the whole institution and all the people that are working in that institution and the programs that you deliver. It comes from a human rights angle, that it's important that we think about the well-being and the safety and the rights of the people that you're working with, and taking into account the special needs of those who may be victims or who may fall into situations of harm because of our actions as an institution. And why we talk about safeguarding is because the aim is to work at preventing abuse and not giving it a chance to thrive in our institutions. And we know that safeguarding is something that is a major risk exposure. In the institutions of higher learning, it may not have yet hit, but in the humanitarian world, many have been the crises that have come to organizations as a result of not taking care of issues of safeguarding. But knowing that you're operating in a context where we have laws and regulations, it's not only unto the enforcers of law to think about the risks that are coming from this, or think that it's an issue that can be addressed externally. We need to think about what is the risk exposure to the institution itself, and does it make us to trust this institution better than the other institutions? For instance, if you're to compare Nairobi and Kenyatta, what would be the main selling point in terms of safety for the students, safety for the staff, and all the other people? What can distinguish you? And we know what when that unfortunate incident happened in Garissa, we saw many people losing trust in that institution and seeking to be transferred elsewhere. So it's important that we think about safeguarding and make it a core part of our institutional culture. And this way, we hope that we'll be able to improve the learning outcomes for our beneficiaries, and in that process also address the power differences. And those power differences are some of the reasons why the barriers that Peninnah was talking about get accentuated within the institutions. And eventually it's critical to know that safeguarding is everybody's business. It's not the learner's business alone. It's the learners, the staff, and even the parents and all the authorities within the institution. All of us have a role to play, because the health, the well-being, and the rights of the individuals in this institution is a concern for all. Next. So we'll look at defining harm. In institutions of higher learning, just like it happens elsewhere on a daily basis, people are exposed to situations of harm. And harm is something that would happen to a person because there's abuse of power, there's abuse of authority, or there's abuse of trust. And it can affect a person in all those ways, physically, psychologically, or emotionally. But there's also harm that can become as a result of abuse. And this abuse, it endangers a person or infringes on their rights. For instance, those issues that Peninnah was talking about, the issues of inclusion, you're in a position of power, but you're infringing on the rights of a vulnerable person, a person with disability, when you fail to give them the space that they need to be able to realize and express themselves in the fullest forms. So some of this is something that happens consciously and others happens unconsciously. And I'm hoping that by the end of this session, we'll be applying a safeguarding lens and our eyes will be open to issues that can endanger somebody's well-being. Does harm happen in our institutions? Yes, it does. Next slide. There has been incidences that have been reported and noted. I appreciate that there's a dearth of information and research information and data regarding issues of safeguarding in institutions of higher learning. The humanitarian context for a long time has concentrated only in the lower institutions of learning, but the agenda is now moving to the higher institutions of learning because the people that were empowered and are now transitioning to the higher institutions of learning, are they finding an enabling environment there? And with the little research that has just begun happening recently, we are concerned that at least 1 in 2 female students is suffering abuse. And globally, we know that harm or gender-based violence is also, it's skewed gender-wise, with at least 1 in 3 females experiencing some form of violence in their lifetime. And we've also seen male students also being harassed by gender-wise. And we're also seeing challenges in terms of accommodation, where most of the institutions of higher learning are having a challenge in accommodation, and the plans for expansion are not very concrete. And what it does is that if you're going to do learning in the evenings or a time that is not safe for the students to travel, and you're expecting them also maybe to access those platforms, or like the computers are accessible in a certain place only, you then need to think about the safety and accessibility of those learning materials and the portals, and to ensure the safety of the students when they are going to school. And we noticed that there's also abuse that's happening also electronically, with all those number of residents indicating that somebody had lied to them electronically. And this is data that is coming from Kenyan universities that is showing us abuse is happening. There's cyberbullying, and there are also incidences of inappropriate context being shared within the learning institutions. And a challenge, a major challenge is the last one, where we are seeing at least 77% of males compared to 13% of females being reported as prone to radicalization, being moved to terrorism and other harmful forms of engagement that would hinder their fruitful engagement in the learning institution. And the question is, these are just some of them. How, when we engage in the digital platforms for learning, are we taking care of the privacy concerns to ensure that students are not oversharing, that what we are doing in those digital learning platforms is also not putting the institutional systems to risk, especially where students would be using their own devices to access the systems of learning within the institution? How are you going, or are you going to take care of possibilities of those same platforms being used for sexting, sextortion, and those unsolicited forms of sharing that might be happening? Like, it might be a surprise, you're here, we are doing this session, and somebody is busy chatting with somebody in that same platform, and the kind of content they are sharing is not content that's acceptable or appropriate for everybody else. What are the safeguards that you put in place to protect everybody who accesses that platform, taking into consideration also issues of disability and inclusion? Next slide. We need to put then safeguarding within the context of the organization and the culture of the organization. And I'll use this expression of this image of an iceberg, where basically culture, very little is actually seen, but a lot of it that really drives the learning, the processes, the systems in the institution, how people do business is underneath. We may not be able to see all that. And this includes even individual inclinations. Please unpack the whole of it. It includes even the individual inclinations that would be driving their willingness or unwillingness to participate in enforcing the measures that you may put in place for safeguarding. So when you are thinking about safeguarding in those online learning platforms, then you need to think about what's the culture of the institution. For instance, if I came to like Kenyatta, I would ask, how do you do business in Kenyatta? They'll probably tell you that we put information up this platform, and then they'll tell you, but we normally don't. Now, after that, we leave the learners to take care of themselves, and then they can come back to us for questions. How do you do business? That how to, we need to think about it, knowing that a lot of information would not necessarily be visible, and there will be patterns and habits that you have been doing that could possibly expose learners to harm, or even put yourself as a staff in a difficult situation. We need to also appreciate that as we are doing this, it's not about ticking boxes that I have a platform and we have put these measures in place. It's not about ticking those boxes. It's moving from a place of ticking boxes to ensuring that you are having a healthy safeguarding culture. And a healthy safeguarding culture is one where people can engage freely, consultations are happening freely in a way that is safe, that learning platform would be a safe environment for yourself and for the learners and for everybody within the institution, and that when there are issues of concern, they are raised and addressed fully. We don't avoid situations where learners have to keep following up on issues that are not being resolved over a period of time. Appreciating that many other times that culture literally eats a strategy for breakfast. So if you have a strategy that you have not taken into consideration the cultural issues, it might end up failing. Please move to the next slide. So when you are thinking about safeguarding in those learning platforms, then these are some of the principles that you can put into consideration and see how you bring on board everybody within the institution at all the levels, at the leadership level, the learners level, and even the trainers level. All those levels need to work together to ensure that there is empowerment, that as much as possible in those learning platforms, even learners themselves are being supported to make informed consent and to make their own decisions. Like if I really want to access the course online, or I don't want to access that course online, what are the options for me? Have I been explained to all those issues that would affect my performance on that course if I take it online or if I do it physically? How am I empowering my learners in this process? And how are staff empowered also to ensure that they are protected? And let's seek to prevent. So seek more preventative measures rather than reactive measures. It's also sad because a recent report by PwC indicated the other day that in the face of crises happening, over 75% of respondents were not ready to respond to a crisis. And literally, those institutions or those organizations went to seek help externally from consultants outside there to help them in responding to that situation. The question is, as we engage in those learning platforms online, are we ready? Have we put in preventive measures, or will we respond in the face of crisis, or do we already have a responsive measure? I'll talk more a little about it later. And ensure that eventually what you're also putting in place is appropriate for the risk that you're trying to address. It's very responsive. For instance, it's about people's privacy, and you don't want them to receive unsolicited messages. Are you giving them an option to see the kind of messages that they want to receive when on that platform? Are you blocking chats, or do you have those various ways that you can be able to censor the information that is flowing through the chats? Or it's just a free-for-all in terms of the engagement? And who are your partners? Because safeguarding is not something you can do as an individual. It's something that you work with your community, the whole institution. And knowing at times that if an issue arises, some of them may border also on criminal considerations. Are you already partners with the authorities? Do you know who are your partners? If somebody is to suffer some of that psychological harm, or the kind of information or communication that is shared there. For instance, let me just imagine somebody has my photo and it is not an appropriate photo, and then in the middle of class, it's posted right there through the open platform, and I'm embarrassed, I'm traumatized, I'm harassed by everybody. And with all this age of photoshopping, it might not be even the real photo. It has been cropped and inappropriate information put in there. How do you protect me? Do you have a system, or do you have a partnership with people who are already ready to help you in trauma support, in providing counseling, in all those measures of protecting that person, so that they're able to still also continue and complete their learning? And how accountable are we? And our systems transparent in terms of safeguarding? Can we show what exactly we are doing in a way that everybody knows what's expected of them? Next slide. So some things that would need to think about in terms of focus when we are thinking about embedding safeguarding in institutions of higher learning. At the moment, other institutions generally from research, they have aspects, but it's yet not to be embedded fully within the institution processes. So how do we seek to embed that? Let's look at the issues of leadership and accountability. Let's have a team that's specifically thinking about issues of safeguarding, thinking about the well-being and the safety of the learners on those platforms, having discussions and deliberations on how we can make our learning platforms more safe and more accessible and inclusive. And when you're thinking also about the issues of protection for that team and for all the trainers, also think about how you will receive feedback and how you will support the users of those platforms in a way that is effective, that's responsive to their needs, and that's supporting them to realize their goals. And when you're doing so, recognize and appreciate that these learners are in a place where they are seeking self-actualization, they are seeking to be empowered, they are seeking to move from the place of using Maslow's model of the hierarchy of human needs. They are beyond also, whereas we are not discounting the issues of psychological safety or physiological or all those things. They are at the place when they are looking more to actualize themselves, they are looking to belong, and they are also dealing with issues of esteem, and they want to be sure that I am capable and I'm going to amount to something. So how will you support them in that self-actualization journey? And that would also go to your responsiveness. And eventually, it's critical that we have measures where people can report, and those measures are known, mechanisms are known, they are recognized, and they have been publicized everywhere, and people know how to go about the process of reporting. Like if I have a complaint, how do I make that complaint in a way that people will be responsive to it? And as a trainer, it's important maybe to take this as a project and do a risk assessment for your online platform using a safeguarding lens. So next slide. So what would we be looking at? I'll take that when you get this slide, you'll be able to discuss further and complete for yourself. These are just some of the things that you'd be looking at. Looking at your platform, have you taken care of the privacy concerns? Then ask yourself, if privacy is to be breached, who is likely to be harmed? Within the institution, are there any policies already in place? Have there been any measures put to ensure privacy? And if not, then what is the further action we need to take so that those issues of privacy are fully addressed and ourselves and our learners, we are all safe? Then put accountability. Who is going to be responsible for that particular action that you're recommending to be taken? For instance, if it is the IT people to put in some layers so that they take care of issues of privacy, they give consent, and they are putting in controls, are you giving them a timeline by when they need to complete that? And who is monitoring that so that it is completed within time? When you're doing recording for your classes, ask yourself, where are you recording? How safe is that place? What message does it send to the different learners? Who, what, the technology, the skills, the equipment that you're using, is it also safe? Are your systems and technologies also safe? And think about safeguarding within the system. Do you have an inbuilt system where you can receive complaints and feedback, and also that you are able to report any concerns, so that there's continuous learning and improvement? And hopefully we will improve on the data available regarding issues of safeguarding within the learning institutions. Next. Other things that I would also recommend that you think about, these are more measures that are looking at the institution as a whole, is the issue of policies. A lot of the institutions don't have specific policies that are looking at safeguarding, and others are not holistic. They're addressing only parts of that. For instance, I reference what was mentioned about rafts. We know we are operating in Kenya. There is Occupational Safety and Health Act that expects us to put in those ramps. But beyond the ramps, what are the other safety measures that you put in your institution to ensure that the institution is a safe learning environment? Beyond the issues of us, also there's the issue of recruiting. The students that you're recruiting, do you know their backgrounds? Or are we recruiting students who are likely to also be a risk to the other students? Or are we recruiting staff who have been known or have been involved in some form of causing harm to learners in the past, and we are not doing background checks on that? In terms of training, it's critical that we build the capacity of all the personnel and the learners on safeguarding, including their own online safety. How do they protect themselves when they're engaging in those online platforms, to ensure that the information and their data is safe, to ensure that their locations are safe, no one can track them for illegal purposes. And when you're designing your curriculum, and embody safe design, where you start off with that risk assessment and then look at what else can you do to ensure that your curriculum would be safe when people are accessing it online, or when they are accessing it, or even when you're delivering it in a face-to-face context. And reporting mechanisms for universities, where a few of them already have them in place, it's important that they are disseminated widely and that we create trust in those reporting mechanisms for where incidences or issues have arisen. We'll see shortly that there are barriers or things that hinder people from employing those reporting mechanisms. And I do not know how many of them would apply to institutions. And critical that we monitor and review what we are learning. If incidences are rising as the lessons are going on, the learning processes are happening, what are those incidences telling us? Are we documenting that data? And are we letting it speak to us so that we improve the delivery and the learning processes for future courses, and others can also be able to replicate and learn from those processes? Next slide. So many are the challenges that have been encountered in digital learning, and also in generally safeguarding in learning institutions, especially institutions of higher learning. I've already talked about the reporting mechanism challenges, but there's also been a case of lack of trust in the system. If people in the past have reported and no action was taken, or people in the past have reported and they were stigmatized, they were victimized simply because they reported an incident of harm having taken place, then others are not likely going to use that. And we have the placement processes during the learning process. Whereas within the institution, maybe you have already started putting these measures, or you're thinking about some of them that you can put in place. How do you ensure that even when your learners go for learning placement outside the institution, they are safe? How are you engaging with the people who will put them in those institutions where they are going, so that your learners are not abused, or they are not harassed, or they're not put in situations of harm because of the fact that they actually need to go for attachment, they need to go for an internship and all? How are the institutions helping that? Maybe they could be looking at situations of negotiating agreements with some institutions that are already known to be safe places, so that they enhance the learning experience. And the awareness challenge, it's across the divide. Let's strengthen the expectations and the awareness on the safety expectations for accessing those platforms, and how people can be able to protect themselves. We know that we are moving in an era where there are data protection requirements and many other compliance obligations that institutions are dealing with. It may be feeling like a burden, but it is possible to reduce this burden when you are prepared and you are all working together as a team, so that you're able to fully comply. And especially if you make them part of your policies for the institutions, like if institutions having policies like on harassment, institutions having policies on how can people use laptops or not their external devices, and ensuring that they are using them responsibly and fairly assessing the systems in a way that's protecting the learners and also the staff and everybody within that institutional platform. Next slide. So I know we have said a lot and it looks like a major shift, and you're wondering, where do we start? This is just a simple simulation of appreciating that safeguarding is not a one-day affair, it's a journey. And my desire and the desire of the institution is that we can move to get to the place of level 3, where everything is integrated within what we are already doing and what we are planning to do as an institution, supported by sound policies and good practices that are encouraging learners and offering them platforms to engage with the decision makers within the institutions in a safe way without victimizing them. And I pray that the institutions, there's no institution that's at the reactive level where we absolutely do not have any policies in place to support our safeguarding journey, but let's seek to grow. Let's seek to embed many of those good practices as much as possible. Next slide. And in a few minutes, I'll just say, unpack it all. I'll just talk about the Leonard Cheshire. We have a safeguarding framework that can also maybe be a useful reference for the institutions as they're thinking, how do we embody this and carry all this? And our pillars, we look at prevention, we look at reporting and responding to harm, and we look at the governance and review. And we have different standards that are looking at our programming, our recruitment, issues of health and safety, and the security of our people, our operations, everything regarding us, and whether our systems are safe and our operations are safe. But we also embody a reporting mechanism that is accessible to everybody if you have a complaint or a concern. And we have a responding mechanism, a responding mechanism that's appreciating that we cannot deal with issues of safeguarding on our own. We have partners that we've already identified ahead of time. And we have the leadership and the board on board. They put in these supporting policies and procedures, and they regularly review them through the reporting processes. We would urge that if you can borrow from here and just maybe say, this is one of the, like a framework you can consider to guide you as you're embodying that within the institutions, it would be very helpful for the safeguarding journey. Next slide. And what we are doing to support you in that is that we are in the process of developing a safeguarding training manual that you can reference and that you can use to help the institutions in embedding issues of safeguarding within the learning programs, within the institutions, to ensure that they are safe. This is going to be available in the OU open platform once it's validated and rolled out. And we really appreciate the ongoing partnership and the platform that you've given us to engage on these issues, because this is the beginning of an ongoing conversation where we need to all come together to make our learning institutions safe and a place where the youth and the learners and everybody will realize their best life objectives. Thank you so much, and we welcome questions.